But let's take some time exploring animations. The timeline is essentially your key to happiness in animations. But there's two timelines here. There's the animate one and there's the regular timeline. So usually just for regular keyframe animations, you only need the regular timeline, and animate is more for, you know, putting building blocks next to one another. So we'll focus mainly on this one. This one you have to pay for. If it says animate light, then you have to go and you know, spend the full whack on getting the full plugin. That has some additional features, but we're not worried about it. If you are interested, on my YouTube channel, I'll show you quickly, there is a series that shows how to use the animate timeline, and it's a whole series in which I'm showing how I made the crab literally from scratch. So under playlists, could you be on there it is. Here, this is it, animating a toon crab. That's the series. And that shows you how I've made this little guy walk, and that happened with Aniblocks. So I'll go and give you that link. This here is what you need to buy if you wanted to, for that thing to no longer say light. And without that removed, you can create Aniblocks. With the light version, you can play them back, but with the full version, you can create your own Aniblocks. And that is handy for things like eye blinks. So yeah, that's the full version of Animate. I'm going to go and post both these links in the chat now. That should get you to my affiliate link to Animate. So we'll worry about the regular timeline here. So as long as you see this here, timeline, then you're good to go. You should see timeline, and you should have your scene tab open as well. And then we can go and do some bits and pieces. So the timeline itself can actually display 3 different versions of itself. And that is, if you're in the timeline and you use this little disclosure triangle thing here, you will see, as at the very top here, there's a view mode, and it can go into basic, intermediate, and advanced. So I think that's the first thing that we need to take care of, that you're in the advanced view mode. Basic is literally like just a play track, but you can't really do much with it. Intermediate gives you some features, and advanced gives you all the features, and I think we need all the features to get you started. So that's on the timeline here, on the timeline tab. Then in this, with this little, you know, disclosure, the hamburger icon, I like call it, and in there at the very top there's view mode. So switch that over to advanced, and that's a good start. And then we can take it from there. Most of the features of the timeline are displayed at the bottom of the screen. So the default is a timeline that only has 30 frames, and filament draw options, that's just my only option that I have in the scene here. Anything else you add to the scene will come up as something animatable in the timeline. So if I go and create a cube, for example, keep it nice and simple for now, like a cube, 1 meter by 1 meter, and we say Y positive. Then here's my cube. Now I also see a cube down here in the timeline. Perfect. On scene, I didn't do anything. It's just good to have that open, the scene tab, because it means you can select whichever item you want to animate, and then on the bottom left, it'll also select the same thing. So you can select, if I say if I had another item here, maybe make a cone, just, you know, for argument's sake, and I'll go and move the cone, universal manipulator at the ready. And I have a cube here and I have a cone here. Then I can either select these things and they get selected in the scene tab, and the same happens in the timeline tab here. It's just another way of selecting them, just something, you know, to be aware of. Keyframes get set for the item that is selected. That's just the point I'm trying to make. You don't have to have filament. No, we can delete that. It's just I have it in my scenes as a default. That's why it shows up. So you can't delete it. It's cool. It's just then your viewport looks all blown out and it's terrible. So I'm keeping it on because I like working in filament. So the main thing, I'm just worrying about the cube here now. I'm gonna give it a color. You don't have to do that, but I like having my objects having a little bit of color here. He can be blue, and then my cone can be, I don't know, maybe that color, that. Nice and colorful. So I'll worry about the cube for now. So these triangles here at the bottom, they indicate where keyframes might be, but they are not the actual keyframes. So that's one thing that's really important to remember. So if I were to go and this thing is my playhead. If I go and move it forward to say frame 10, and on frame 10 I move my cube somewhere else. So I might just move it over here. That's all I'll do. Then you see that I have these triangles here, and they kind of smuggled themselves in here automatically. It's Daz ways of setting automatic keyframes, and there's nothing really we can do about it. But yeah, it's just something to be aware of. And once you do that, and you have 2 keyframes, you can go left click and drag this manipulator here, this little timeline thing. And what should happen now is that Daz Studio should interpolate between the 2 keyframes. We can see it's not doing that because the first keyframe is a little weird and wonky. It indicates there is a keyframe, but it doesn't often set one. So I'm gonna have to go over and move this guy into its 0 position. Might as well just type in 0 here. And then I can see that Daz Studio is in fact interpolating between the 2 keyframes. So as a force of habit, when you start animating, I make sure my object is in the position that I wanted it to be, and then I click the manual keyframe button, which is this guy down here, and that is down here. This is the create keyframe button. So that's kind of important to remember, that whenever you do something and an object, so like say, this guy is here and there's no keyframe here, and you move this guy into a different position, then a keyframe is created. Now when you move, then you can see that other things happen, but I can also see that my cube isn't in the bottom position as it was before. And those are all real mysteries, and we'll figure out why that is and how Daz Studio thinks about these things, because it's confusing to newcomers, I tell you that. Oh, you don't? That is interesting. Try to see if you have something like this little icon here. That is essentially the graph editor. I mean, you can make this larger. If your timeline looks like this, then you can click this little button and then collapse this other option, this other portion that the timeline has. So this is the graph editor. And we'll deal with that maybe. It's not something you strictly need to know about, but this is the old GraphMate plugin, if you remember that. There were 2 plugins. There used to be KeyMate and GraphMate, and they were both made by the same people who made Animate, and they got bought out, and Daz owns the code, so they had kind of they basically amalgamated this with Daz Studio 4.14, I think 4.12 even, I don't remember, I think 4.12. They just integrated those. That did the trick perfect. Okay, good stuff. So that collapsed, and then we can focus on anything else in the timeline. So actually, yeah, let me go and leave that expanded. So the reason why my cube is no longer at the bottom here is because it never had a keyframe for its Z translate. So Z was not something that was ever keyframed, and I can tell you why this is, because if you open up the cube, then we have its properties here, and then we have general, and we have the transforms. And notice that we still see triangles here all this way. And eventually, if we drill down more into transforms, translation, now we see the actual keyframes, which are now little circles here. So these are the keyframes. The triangles are essentially just indicators that keyframes are somewhere on that track, but it doesn't tell you what exactly is keyframe. So in here, I can see that only X translate has been keyframed here, and then Y translate has been keyframed here, but the Z translate, which is the height of the cube, has never been mentioned, has never been keyframed. So when I moved it, it kind of got confused and didn't bring it back to the beginning here. So that's why that happened. So if I wanted to keyframe that, I can go and change a value, and the moment I do that, Daz Studio will put a keyframe in here. So watch this space under Z translate, and when I go and change my I'm talking rubbish here. I meant the Y translate. If I'm now changing my Y translate to the bottom again, there's no keyframe here. It's currently at 125. If I go and take that down, the moment I start moving the slider, I get a keyframe. And that is because now Daz Studio says, that data is different than what I have here, which is nothing. And that was not the same. So if I put that to 0, then Daz Studio acknowledges that here, the Y translate value is 0. Here it's 125. And when I go and play this back now, the cube will go kind of like a rocket up there. If I wanted it to stay on the bottom until here, I'd have to go and set another keyframe here. So if I go and just change that position to 0, then Daz Studio sets a keyframe here. The cube will stay glued to the floor-ish, and then it will take off like a rocket. Let me know if that makes sense so far. If this is collapsed, it's actually impossible to see what keyframes are set where. I can see that some keyframes are here. I might just go move the cone away just so that we have, that we don't have that. I can see that there are keyframes here, but I don't know what values these keyframes are. I can go and try to tell Daz Studio to go. I can rectangular click this here. I can try to left click and drag this to a different position. That often doesn't work. I can also go and right click and and copy this. Sometimes it doesn't work, like in this case. Yeah, it doesn't seem to work. Sometimes you can grab them from here and then move them, but often it's a great distress to newcomers that they try to move these things and they can't actually do it, because the actual keyframes down here, you can move those, you can delete those, you can copy those. So if I'm thinking I want to change something like this important keyframe, those 2 keyframes, I'd like for that to already happen on frame 5. I can go and literally just draw a rectangle around them and then left click and drag them over to where I want them to be, and then that's how the keyframes work, and that's how that happens. And you can also split them up, so I can go and just take the one on the top here and drag that over to frame 10. So that means I'm going to stay on the bottom until here, and then the cube starts going up already, and then follow through with the rest of it. Yeah, so that's how you handle keyframes. Now you do. So there's one other thing. If I just go and move this Y translate keyframe back here, and I go and just play this animation through, and we'll watch it. Technically, what happened is that if I look closely, my cube doesn't actually glide on the bottom linearly. It kind of goes and then dips and then it goes up, and that's also something that it's maybe a little bit hard to see here. But if I go and look straight from the front and just keep watching my cube here as he goes from left to right, I can see that he dips down and then he goes to the top. And I'm thinking, well, who's responsible for this dipping down? I see that on my Y translate, this keyframe says Y translation is at 0. Righty. Then at the next keyframe at 10, Y translation is also at 0. But if I go and see what Daz Studio does to the cube, I can see that it actually interpolates something into the negative. And that is exactly what the name suggests. It is interpolation. So between when Daz Studio calculates this position, and then there's time, and then it kind of moves all these values to that position, there's interpolation that happens there. So Daz Studio is great at that. But in so doing, it knows that the next keyframe here, that means it goes up to 125. So what it does is kind of anticipates that motion and adds this logarithmic kind of scale to it, and that makes it look a little bit cartoony. So it goes and does this, and then it does that. And you can change that because not every animation wants to be like that. So like one example that I'll show you in a minute is how to do a turntable animation. And if you had set that up with this as the default interpolation mode, then it would just go and speed up the rotation. It would start, it would speed up, then it would slow down, and then would start and speed up and slow down again. And that's not a continuous motion. So sometimes you want that continuous motion. And for that, we need to change the interpolation type of the keyframes. So the default is in fact the T, which I think is short for TCB, which I don't really know what that stands for, but it's the one that interpolates. If you go and click a keyframe and then right click on it, should you not see the thing that it says? No, what a shame. So with the keyframe selected, then I thought there was a context menu that appeared here. Is that not the case anymore? Maybe they've taken that away. Well, good thing is we can deal with it differently. On the kind of right hand side here, you can see this option which now says TCB, and that, if you click that, that is the interpolation type. It's very difficult to see, but TCB is the default. And if I change this to linear, then you can see that my keyframe here has changed to a little L. So it's not a circle anymore, it's now a little diamond shape. And if I go and do this to the next one, constant, then it changes into the little C here. And yeah, I thought there was a right-click version of this at one point, but I guess that is no longer there. Constant is literally a change from which we go from one value to the other without any interpolation. Linear is a linear interpolation, and then TCB is kind of the curve. And they're all good for different things. But yeah, if I go and put this to L now, and then only this up motion is linear, I should now see that it still hasn't done that. I think I need to go and do this on all these keyframes. So they all need to participate and all be linear. And now when I move my cube, it does in fact do that. It no longer goes and dips down. So that's how linear interpolation works. Does that make sense so far? I'll show you how to do turntables in a minute. In fact, we can probably use because turntables, that's a good thing. If you've made a character and you want to render out a quick turntable animation, that's just beautiful to do that. And there's multiple ways of doing it, and we need to know how to deal with this interpolation mode for then. So if that makes sense, actually, let's go into that then. Let's go into making a quick turntable animation. Not so much of the cube, but of something, else. I'll go and delete the cube, and I'll bring in a character. It doesn't have to be anything exciting. I'll just use my stream safe textures here so that Twitch is happy about what we're doing here. And here she is. Let's give her a little bit of a pose. Like that. That's our character, and she's all dressed up, and imagine she's now lit and stuff. And let's go and frame her up like so, and point a camera at her. And so in this case we want the camera to be static, but we want the character to revolve. And a turntable animation looks good if we animate something like yes, I see, yes, that is sometimes a problem, yes. So I'm going to go and change my duration of the animation first of all. So for turntable animation, 30 frames isn't enough. That would be too fast. We need to have something at least 160 frames if we're thinking in 30 frames a second. If you wanted to render this out in something a higher frame rate or lower frame rate, you don't need as many. But I'm thinking in 30 frames a second now. And that means I think 4 to 5 seconds is a good time frame to think about this. So let's say 4 seconds. 4 seconds at 30 frames a second, that would be 120. Always say, no, hang on, 4, yeah, that's 120. Always say 5 seconds, that would be 150. Let's do that. Let's do 150 frames. So that's at the bottom left here. That's where you can set the frames per second. That's the frame rate. That's the current frame here. And this is the range. And this is the total. So at the front here, if we say 150 frames in total, let's type in 151. Because it's frame 0 plus then 150 frames. I understand. You have to do the maths at least in your head to understand how long your animation wants to be. So you need to tell Daz Studio that, and you need to be aware of these things. So we think in 30 frames a second, that's a good way to start. Be aware that most video games and fluid motion, like what I have on my channel, if I move my mouse like this, it moves very fast. And it does this because I'm transmitting in 60 frames a second. Most video games are rendered in 60 frames a second, but for regular animations, 30 is good. Hey Bloxfy, how's it going? So 30 frames, we're saying 5 seconds of duration, so we have to say 5 times 30, which is 150. We add 1 frame, that's 151. So now our timeline is much longer here. I have much more frames to set here. And I'm going to go and just use my Genesis character as an example. And I'll go to her general transform settings. And the first thing I want to probably do is set a keyframe where she is right now. And I'll do that with this manual keyframe button here. Boom. And that's kind of important to do that because otherwise we don't have keyframes here. And I'll come to the body morphs and stuff in a moment. Just wanted to make absolutely sure that we have a T in all these X, Y, and Z transforms. So yeah, that's perfect. So now, since I want my figure to rotate once around its own axis, I can go and move the slider to the very end of my timeline, which is the last frame. And that frame ideally should match up now with this frame. In fact, it should be slightly before that. So in our case, we're looking at the rotation, and we want her to not rotate in the X or in the Z, but in the Y. Technically, we want her to rotate one full rotation. So one full rotation will be 0 equals 360, right? So we'll make it one less, let's say 359. So I'll just type in that value. She has barely moved. Daz Studio has set a keyframe here. And if I go and move the slider now, I can see that my figure is moving, rotating once around her own axis, which is exactly what I'm expecting. And that's of course not in translation, it's in rotation here. Y rotate. So we have all keyframes here, and we have one other keyframe on the other side here. So now if I go and play this back, I can see that my figure is in fact rotating, but she's not rotating linearly. She kind of starts slow, then speeds up, and then she goes slow again. And that's not something that looks good when it's looped. And this is exactly where we can go and implement that, that technique we just learned, namely with the TCB to linear switch. So let me go and do that. I'll select the first keyframe here. That's the Y rotate, so that all the keyframes need to be participating in that. I'll go over here to the last keyframe. I'll hold down Shift and select that as well, so that both of them are selected. And then I go and select this little menu here, switch that over to linear. And then when I play back, she's going to be rotating at a constant speed. And that's now the thing that I can go and turn into a GIF or into something else and put it on OpenSea, and it's like a, an MP4 video, and it just keeps going and going and going. So yeah, that's the way to do it. There's another way to do it by not actually rotating the figure. You can put the figure into something like an empty or null, and then you can go and let that happen. There's also, you might want lights to rotate with her. You might not want lights to rotate with her. So, one of those things. Does that all make sense so far? And if there's any questions, do let me know. I'm happy to address them. So you can also make her turn into the other direction. That's also possible. And that is by looking at the last keyframe and turning that into the negative. So currently mine is 359. If I want that to go in the other direction, I'll say minus 359. And then I go and press play. Now she rotates the other way around. Kind of depends on how you want your turntable to look like. All makes sense. I like it. I like it. So, yes, that's where you find keyframes for most of the general transformations, like transforms and rotates and all that. Something that Daz Studio does not show in the timeline by default is, and I'll just go back to the first frame here, is things like the morph dials for a character. So they can't be seen here. I have the pose controls Oh no, actually, sorry. So by default, this is what it looks like. You have TRS selected in this menu. So by default, that means the translation, rotation, and scale shows, and you can also see the individual bones here, or the individual other nodes on the character, but you don't see things like the body morphs, or on cameras you don't see depth of field values, or on lights you don't see the light intensity and all that. And that is because that's disabled by default. It's this menu here that's interesting for that. It kind of hides and shows different types of values in the timeline. So TRS means in fact translation, rotation, and scale. O means other, that got changed recently into something, and then we have aliases and we have hidden values. So other is kind of the more important or the interesting category if you wanted to animate the figure going from base female into a custom character, for example, or you wanted to dial up a morph that you want to animate, then this doesn't show. So if you enable other here, then you see that a lot of other things are showing up. So now you have the whole actor category, and you have hidden as well. You've got the morphs category, and you've got the pose controls. Likewise, if you're thinking, hey, I don't need my character, I don't need to see translation, rotation, and scale right now, you can disable that, and then that gets rid of some of the values in your timeline. If you think, hey, I'm seeing way too much here, and I'm a little bit distracted, and it takes me a while to figure out what value is, then you can disable them. If you disable that, then it's basically nothing left. So other is kind of cool, because then you can go into properties, and then you go into actor, and then you can go, say, into people, and then you say real world, and say you wanted to turn her into Bridget from the first frame into the last frame while she rotates. You know, that's a possibility. Let me go and do that. So we go to the last frame, for example, and on the last frame I'd like for the Bridget value to be dialed up. So this is just the same as going into here, people, real world, and then there's Bridget. So on that last frame I want that to be Bridget, and now she will go and turn around, and once she's turned around she's going to be Bridget. So that animates the morph slider now, and that doesn't really loop anymore, because you know, when we come back to her, she's you know, snapping back into the 0 value of Bridget. But yeah, you get the point. That's how that works. Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's what you can do. Yes, exactly. Which is kind of fun, and so you can have, yeah, exactly. You can literally have characters change from one into another. And I think if you look on the Daz front page, I think there is kind of a video that's embedded in here. At one point, the one character changes into another. This is exactly how, this is exactly how they've done it. That one little cutaway, that's exactly how they've done it. See if it comes up again. But yeah, you get the picture. It's exactly how they've done it. And I remember that was one of the things that was so cool about when Genesis 1 was released, that you could literally turn a male into a female, or you could turn one. I think they had this little animation. That's it, exactly. They had this little animation where a guy was in a prison cell, and they had locked him up because obviously he's going to turn into a Hulk, and then, you know, you keep animating the kind of Hulk slider, and yeah, that's how they've done it. It's just a very hidden feature, I must say. And so really under the hood, what happens here with this interpolation is that anything between two keyframes is changed over time. That's all animation really does. And if you do that on multiple levels, then it can look quite complex. So if we take another example and use an eye blink, for example, you wanted to know about an eye blink as well. Let me go and start a brand new scene, just so that we're on a fresh page here, and I'll go and load myself my woman in again here. So for an eye blink, it's kind of interesting to right, exactly, this was a pain in the butt, and this is exactly why that changed as well, because it was really difficult to preview things on a base figure that wasn't actually the end result. So I'm kind of also glad that they went back to split bases again, even though, you know, it was sometimes it'd be handy to have that, you know, to have both character morphs in the same thing. So for an eye blink, let me go and zoom into her face. For an eye blink, there's something else that now comes into animations, and that is kind of this thinking real life seconds in what happens. So for an eye blink, I keep thinking, so when do I actually blink? Do I blink once a second, or do I blink once every 2 seconds? And then what does my eye blink look like? So I'm just making it up here. I'm thinking I'm blinking once every 2 seconds. So that means in order for this to work, I need a 2-second animation, which, if we remember 30 frames a second, 2 seconds, that'll be 60 frames. That means on the bottom here, our total animation count needs to be what? Answers on a postcard. Once we've worked that one out, we can think, well, how does the eye blink actually get constructed? So I have a slider that goes, eyes closed, eyes open, but how does what would make a realistic eye blink? So we'll come to that in a moment. So once again, we have 30 frames a second. I'm thinking I need a 2-second animation. How many frames is that? I'll tell you the answer is 61, because it's 2 seconds at 30 frames. That's 60 plus 1, that's 61. That's our 2-second timeline. So then, since we're thinking this is going to loop, I'm going to say my actual eye blink, I'll put that around frame 20. So the eyes are open from here all the way over to frame 20. Then my eyes are going to close. They're going to stay maybe closed, and then they're going to open again. But then the next thing I need to think about in regards to anything that moves is, so basically for the first 20 frames, I want nothing to happen. So that means that if I say I set a keyframe here on frame 0 with her face like this, I can't go to frame 20 and then go and close the eyes. I don't actually remember where the eyes are. I mean, where the eyes closed slider is. Gotta kind of search for it here. It's under post controls. That's it. Eyes closed. There we go. So I can't really do that. I can't go and say close the eyes here, because when I do that, it'll interpolate closing the eyes from here to there. That's not an eye blink. That's like a slow eyes closing, but that's not an eye blink. So the trick is to first of all click, Control Z. The trick is to set a keyframe on frame 0 with the eyes open, which we've done. Then we go to frame 20, at which point we still want the eyes to be open. So I'm going to have to go and press another keyframe here. And that assures that between here and there, nothing happens. So that's a thing that often happens to animation newbies, that you forget, oh, actually, this is not what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to stay and then do something. So then if you look at eye blinks, they're not actually linear. They don't go close and open. If you blink, you close your eyes faster than you open them. So I'd say we close our eyes over 2 frames. I'm just making it up. So I move my timeline 2 frames ahead. At that point, I want my eyes to be closed. So let's say that's my eyes closed. This now means eyes are open. Over 2 frames, we're leaving the eyes closed. And I'm maybe thinking she might leave her eyes closed for 2 more frames. We'll see if that looks good. So that means I need to set another keyframe here so that the eyes stay closed over the next 2 frames. So we'll arrive, nothing happens. We close our eyes over 2 frames. We leave our eyes closed over 2 frames. And then she opens her eyes again. But the opening eyes process is actually a little bit slower than the closing eyes process. We don't do this, we do this, right? Or like, in exaggerated movement, we do that. So in that case, this was 2 frames, this was 2 frames. Let's say she opens her eyes over 4 frames. So then I go and move my cursor to, let's say 3 or 4 frames. I'll say 4 frames. And at that point, I want my eyes to be open again. And then once again, for the rest of this, I don't want anything to happen. So I'll go and move my timeline to the very end of this. And then I set another manual keyframe that assures the eyes are still open at that point. There we go. And then that should now at least half be a realistic eye blink. And if we find, hey, that's actually, I'd like for the eyes to blink a little bit faster, or I'd like for them to also open a little bit faster, or I want for them to not be closed for as long, I can go and now change the position of the keyframes. We've basically done the hard work and the thinking about it, and now it's about refining this a little bit into something that, you know, looks better or looks more like what we want. Right? I'm thinking that as well. I've done a lot of eye blinks. And also, don't forget, this is a preview. So when you render this out, the effect might be different. So the preview that we see might not be in real time. It might be slightly delayed, especially if you have high resolution characters like this. This is just regular Genesis 8, but if I go and switch her into base resolution, we might see an even faster preview. That might see this is a little bit more fluid, so we could probably get more frames out of this. And I suppose we can now go and add expressions to this as well. So if we're thinking we wanted to, on top of this, we also wanted to have an expression, this will now affect a different slider. Or you can layer other things on top of that by, you know, making the heads move and whatnot. So this is kind of where Animate comes in handy, because now that we've done this, there's really, without Animate, there's no way to isolate this or reuse it. That's kind of where Animate is really good, because I can go over to Animate here and right click anywhere down here and create an Aniblock from Studio Keyframes. And this is only possible with the full version of Animate. So if I do that, it goes and comes up with this, you know, crazy dialog here, and we say, I think direct copy is correct. We want to have morphs and values. That's important. Without it, the eye blinks are actually morphs or the values. This is basically the other track there. Without that, it's not going to be, it's not going to come over. If I say done, thinks about it for a second, and now we have an Aniblock here. So now if I go and press play, my eyes are still blinking, which is, you know, good. That's kind of what I'm expecting. There's actually a slightly varied version of my blink, so they look slightly different. I'll explain more about that in a moment. But my timeline now no longer has keyframes. So there's nothing on the timeline, even though we had set them up, there's no keyframes here anymore. And the reason for that is when Animate is done turning this into an Aniblock, it will take control, it will take the keyframes in and then go and remove anything that was on the timeline. So the cool thing is that with this now, we can go and extend this now. If I maybe had a 20-second scene and I needed to extend my timeline because I want her to walk around and all that, I don't have to create an eye blink every 2 seconds. I can now go and just have a much longer timeline here. This is now here 540 odd frames, and I've done that by increasing this white little slider here that adds more frames to the timeline. And I've also extended, basically looped my Aniblock and made it repeat. So now I have like kind of 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds on my timeline. And the cool thing is, if I go and play this back now, she's going to just keep blinking while the action moves on. So that's kind of the magic behind the Aniblocks. I don't have to now constantly set keyframes. I can just see she's going to blink while doing something else. And the cool thing is I have a completely fresh timeline that can do other things while she's blinking. So I could go and animate her expressions, animate her head turns, and you know, all that. So that's the magic of Aniblocks. You can go and save them and then also reuse them for other Genesis figures. That's quite nice. So once you've made your Aniblock, which is just this 2-second snippet, you can go and say, hey, that's all my hard work done. You can also, with this, maybe I'll just, repeat that a few times. I can also go and double click that and where was that again? I can, oh, there it is, 100%. This here, I can also go and make that faster or slower. So if I'm thinking, hey, I'd like my eye blink to be a little bit faster, I can maybe type in 150%, and then the Aniblock here gets played back faster. So as a result, my girl is now going to blink more frequently. Well, if, you know, that, hello. Hello. If my animation were like 12 seconds, as an example there. So I'm going to play that back. She's now going to blink more frequently than before. And I can also do this by elongating the blink or the block, and then that makes her blink slower, less frequent. And it's kind of cool if you want to have, if you had a walking Aniblock and you want figures to walk at different speeds. Say if you have 3 figures, they all use the same catwalk animation. You can have one at 110%, one at 90%, and then one at 100%, and they all appear to be walking slightly differently. So that's the magic of the Aniblock timeline. That's a good thing to get acquainted to, because it makes you makes your animation more efficient. Because you can now, if I were to go back to my timeline and now animate expressions, for example, I can then just focus on that, and in the animate track I can overlay, I can essentially have a second track here in which I then go, well, this is my expressions track, another one is the movement of the head track, another one is the movement of the fingers track, and all the while I can go back to my timeline and basically work with a completely fresh slate. Does that make sense so far? See what happens when we make her blink much slower. So like make her blink at 50%. It takes forever for her to blink. She's like extremely sleepy now. And then of course the timeline itself is also important to understand in regards to dForce. So that's where dForce can work with the timeline, and it opens up a whole new possibility of how you'll be able to dForce things, like the classic of woman sitting down on a chair. You have to animate something, because otherwise she'd be standing inside the chair, maybe then turn into the sitting position, and that would potentially intersect the skirt with the chair, and then there's issues and explosions and stuff. Whereas when you animate this literally over 1 or 2 seconds, you can either animate the chair into place underneath her. That's a possibility. Then she would sit down, and then the dress would gradually get moved out of the way. dForce is happy with that. Or you have something that would otherwise cause explosions, because as the pose goes from A to something like this, the arm would go through the cloth, and you could literally just go in the 2-second animation, just make sure the arm doesn't do that, and then go settle so that you avoid the explosion. Indeed, yes, absolutely. Right. Well, let's do that then. Let's have a quick look at how we could do something like that. A woman sitting down with the skirt that where the timeline can help you. So I'll go and shall I save the eye blink? I was kind of proud that I did that here so fast. Maybe I will. It'll also kind of cover how we save Aniblocks. I'll bring that to this length again, and I can go double click it. Can I just rename it? Rename, yes. G8 eye blink won't of course work for Genesis 8.1, because 8.1 doesn't have the eyes closed slider anymore. It's now called eye blink or something like that. So one of those things. Let's go and can we save it? Save as new. Yes. Let's do that. And that will just go into Aniblocks. Perfect. G8 eye blink. I'll do that. Commercials. What a shame. Yeah, Camilla, either subscribe to my channel or invest into Twitch Turbo, and then you don't have adverts. It's such a shame. I don't think I can disable them. If there is a way, I might actually do that, because they don't make any money at all. They just ruin the experience. One of those things. Okay, let's go back to the regular timeline, and let's go and bring my woman back here, and I'll give her something like a wafty skirt, and we'll find anything a cube will probably do on which she can sit, and then we'll see how we can animate that, or how we can use dForce to make sure there's no issues. Do I have anything that's long and wafty? These are a bit short, so they're barely noticeable. This might be something here. Rycroft clone, that could work. I'll just go use the dress, nothing else. It's still short. I'd love it if I had something much longer. Let me see if there's something that lets me make the dress longer. I don't see any. There is skirt lengthen. Yeah, baby. Okay, perfect. There. Longer version. Should we have a chair maybe? Or like a sofa, something like that? Chair, sofa, something like that. Let me just search. Do we have sofa? No. Okay, good. How about couch? Okay, good. So how about any kind of seat? Okay, good. How about a chair? I have nothing. That's terrible. Okay, let's manually look through. I'm sure we can find chairs and sofas and stuff. Yeah, like this here. Single chair. That's what we're looking for. Perfect. I'm gonna go and move that around. Minus 90 is probably the value of choice here. So yeah, so in principle you have two choices. I'll go and I'll see if I can find a pose for her in which she's sitting. You like this one here? That's neat. Perfect. That might be a neat pose. And of course we want her to sit on the couch here. So you have to kind of think for this to be an animation to begin with. So technically you don't want to move her out now. So usually if this was a still image, I'd go and move her up and then somehow move her. If it was a full scene, I'd kind of move her on top of here, but you don't really want to do that. Let me go bring that back to here. You don't even want to put her into the sitting position right now. So I'll go and undo that because we will probably want to do this over the course of 60 frames. So once again, I'll go into my timeline here. 30 is probably enough as well. I'll just turn it into 60 so that we have a little bit more time for the interpolation. It's probably good for dForce to have that to settle down. So literally we're thinking like this, like an animation. On frame 0, she is in fact standing in the A position, and let's say this is where that seat is. We do have some spurious bits and pieces here. I'm going to delete those keyframes there. So on frame 0, with the figure selected, I'll go and set myself a manual keyframe, and then on the last frame of the animation, I'll turn her into the sitting position, like so. And it is here on the last frame of the animation that I'm going to put her into place. And I'm doing that so that dForce essentially has time to move the figure onto the seat. You could also move the couch into position. That's also a possibility. So instead of moving the figure, we could now go and move the couch. We could animate the couch. That's possible as well. Ah, yes, that is a good point. Yes. Just, all files rather than on yes, absolutely. Do I have a sofa? I thought I should have more than it could. Do you know why? It's because I haven't got all my content installed. That is also, yeah, but definitely all files. Thank you, Camilla. Yes, definitely. So let's say the couch is part of the furniture and we want it to stay here. Then we'll go, so on the last frame of the animation, let's put her into position. And I might just go and make the dress invisible just so that I see where her bottom basically would be. Let's say she sits on it like this. And looking into the camera, that's quite nice. Yeah, middle of the couch, something like that. That'll be good. So there's still a bit of room here, and then she's intersecting with the seat a little bit, so that could cause issues with dForce, right? So we'll see. Maybe we'll go and make her just hover over that a little bit. So I give dForce a bit of a chance to sort this out, right? So this is where the dress will hopefully go, and then we can fix the couch later, and then move her a little bit into position, make a little indent there in the couch, something like that. So this now with the dress on, it looks like the dress intersects, but dForce should sort this out. So the cool thing is that with this being an animation, dForce now knows that it shouldn't really crash into the couch. So this could still cause a problem, but I'm hoping that dForce is now going to learn to go and move the dress out of the way as we do this. I might also make her low resolution just quickly. Right, exactly. Props in the environments tab and all that. Yes. I'll just switch this over to base res so that maybe it's going to simulate a little faster. And now comes the interesting part about how do we tell dForce, please use the timeline to make this calculation and not use the regular setting. So if I go and click simulate now, it'll just use the defaults, and it under simulation, or rather than duration, it'll just calculate current frame, and that's that. But if I switch this over to animated use timeline play range, it will go and do it for as many frames as I have on the timeline. So in our case, that'll be 60. So we can try both versions and see what happens. But this is what I usually do: animated use timeline, and then when we go and hit simulate, it'll go and use the timeline. So to compare that, I don't know if my results are better than the default results, but certainly if I go and use this, then it'll go and just go from its T-pose and probably actually doesn't do anything because it doesn't know that I'm interpolating something. So yeah, if you do this with the timeline, it'll go and acknowledge whatever happens here. Yeah, so right now it doesn't actually know that I have a pose file in there. It just lets her sit in the position that she currently is in. So it's kind of not what we want. But if I go and switch this over to timeline, so then the third option here, custom, is basically the same as the first option, but you set frame count here. If you think, hey, the default is 30, that isn't really letting my animation or my cloth settle as much as I want. But this one here, timeline, means it now looks at whatever happens here, and it'll, hopefully get it right. Let's see what happens. This could take a while. Hey, Miss Julia, how's it going? Thank you for dropping by. Okay, don't explode. Don't explode. But it looks like it's kind of happy because it sees, hey, there's just an obstacle in the way, and I'll just drape the cloth accordingly. Aha! Aha! And I'm thinking 60 frames was actually exactly the right time. Could have even done it a bit slower. Boom, perfect. Now she's sitting down and the dress is as it should be. And we've even elongated it, so that's neat. So she's not quite in the right position. I can't, during the simulation, I can't put her down directly onto the couch. But I think what I can do now, bear with me, caller. I'll go and take the dress away again, and I'll take my single chair and I'll add, I don't know if it's going to work, it's just one of those things, let me try it out. I'll add, what's it called again? A smoothing modifier, right? Is that what I'm adding? I think so. Add that. Then under parameters, under mesh smoothing, smoothing's enabled. And I would like for the collision item to be my Genesis figure. So then, with the Genesis figure selected, I'd like for that to go down a bit. And that means now, see that indentation? That's kind of cool, isn't it? So that now bends this seat down. It doesn't always work great. I think it's also because this is in a base resolution. Oh, it is just a base resolution thing. I might actually go and add a subdivision surface modifier to this, and then it is now in high res. So it's possible that this thing is staying out of there. We go, perfect. Now we have indentations where she might be sitting. So this is also interpolated on the fly. I don't know if dForce is going to be able to work that out. Let's see if it does. So this has now got major danger of explosions happening here. But let's work it out. Let's just see if we can do it. Okay, prepare yourself for explosions. And then if that doesn't work, then, you know, there's always ZBrush. And then just go and touch up whatever shouldn't be intersecting or whatnot. So in an ideal world, I would have done the first option and then have her kind of slightly hover over the couch. And then these indentations I would have tried to do in ZBrush or in Blender. It's going to do well. Come on. Oh, the hesitation. I don't like the hesitation. There we go. It's going well. It's going well. Camilla, like you say, it's going well. We have seating, indentation, minor poke through here, but I think it's also because the dress and the figure are low res right now. Let me go and switch that into high res. Yeah, there we go. So minor adjustment, and we're there. Literally minor adjustment. Tiny bit of poke through on the dress. So the way I would do that is select the couch, or whatever the thing is here, geometry editor, tool settings, select, create selection set, and say couch poke, make invisible, no more poke through, perfection. Lady in a diner. Same here. I suppose that's on the that's now on the figure itself. So select her. Whoops. Yeah, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to do that. Might need to quickly go and make the fingers invisible here. Like, do we have that and fingernails, right? Yes. Let's be inventive here. Perfect. That. And now let's go and select this. That's now create selection set from selected, and I'll say hand poke or whatnot disable. Perfect. Then we go back and make the arms and the fingernails visible again, and we're good. My god, this is going well, gotta say. Yes, we need to fit. That's absolutely right. Yes, we need to fit her fingers. A little bit of posing action there. But yeah, so this is how animations can be helpful with dForce. And so the magic solution here really is to set it up thinking about it as an animation, as a mini animation, rather than a static pose. So this has worked out extremely well, and yeah, there was no explosions and anything, and it could. So the other way to do it would be to dial in to not move the person, leave the person from standing and going into sitting in the same spot without moving her physically, and then instead just moving the couch underneath her bottom. That's also a possibility. Hey, Mr. Rod, how's it going? No worries. I'm going to go and turn this into a highlight so that that it's on YouTube and saved forever. So the way Twitch works is that the streams kind of disappear every once in a while, and on YouTube, on my channel, anyone can benefit. And yeah, I'll totally do that. Is there anything else we want to cover in regards to animation? dForce with animations. We've had the eye blinks. We've had the kind of the basic principles. Oh, I see. Right. Well, for that, I would go and that's a really good question. So imagine you had a scene and she would be sitting with somebody. So if this is like a longer animation, you mean, if like she sits here, somebody else is sitting here, and this is essentially where the scene starts, then I would probably, you'd still have to do this to get to this point where she's sitting, and now you'd say really the animation is like 800 frames long, and you would start rendering from frame 61 to frame 800 for the actual scene. So you'd have to run this for for dForce to work this out. And now you'd probably say, let's set this for just as an argument, for argument's sake, let's say it's a 500 frame animation. Then this is the part that dForce needs, and then from here to there you'd now go and start animating the character, and then she would maybe turn her head and she'd start speaking, and you'd have somebody else in the scene as well that sits next to her, something like that. How do you render it out? As in, so maybe I'm not understanding you correctly. I would now go and just be on frame 60. Let me just put this back. Let me put this back to just to 61. So the way I'd render this out is I'd go to frame 61 and then just go frame up my camera here on frame 61 and then go render this frame out. If it was an animation, then I would start rendering from frame 60 to wherever the end of the action is. So maybe I want to animate the head now and, you know, do all that. That's how I'd do that. It's getting complicated then, because it depends. While she's sitting there, she's probably not going to be static and just blinking. She'd probably do other things. She'd probably do other body movements. So those other body movements would now have to be part of the animation here, right? I'm thinking, gotcha. Okay, so yeah, that's a good point. So we still have that Aniblock, don't we? With her blinking. So let me go and literally just add the blinking Aniblock to her now. And so first of all, the first 60 frames, they're just throwaway frames that are not part of the animation. That's just her so that she gets into this position. So let me say I'll go and make this 121 frames, right? So that from frame 60 onwards, the real action can begin. So let me see if I can go and just add the Aniblock to her now. There's the Aniblock here, the one that I've saved earlier. If I go and put that into here. It's tricky now, I say. So we need 120, that's about 4 seconds. So I think this is kind of the, there we go, 4 seconds. And maybe make it 6 seconds. Like so. I think, does she blink? Yes, there she blinks. Okay, that's cool. That's perfect. So that's good. So she will blink here as well. Not that we want for that to happen. So we just want for her to, like, you know, sit down, look at us and blink. So we'll go make a camera first. Create new camera. And let's do that. Let's say it's square. So I want from frame 60 to, say, frame 120. There should be an eye blink in there. Yeah, there is. Perfect. So in fact, just so that we focus on the eye blink action, let's say from frame 80 to frame 100. That's what renders the eye blink. Just so that we, you know, because animations take a while. So let's go and let's say these are the frames. From frame 80 to frame 100. There is the playback range down here. So these are the total frames, and this is the range. Currently, it's anything and everything we have, but I can tell the range to be from frame 81 to frame 120. Did I say? There, 120. Now we have this this new little strip down here, and that's now the playback range. So I can see my timeline now is basically being zoomed in onto this part here. And it was actually enough to put it to frame 100. Oh man, 100, there we go. So this little strip down here, that is now an excerpt of the timeline that we see from here to there. And I can move that as well, and that'll move these values here. So I can go and move this. And you can see what happens with the timeline. But this here is now the little bit that I want to render out, kind of from frame 81 to 100. And this is what my playhead now shows me. It's coming right in the eye blink. Let me go into do that from here, like from here. 80 to 100. 80 to 100. Oh, come on. There. So in order to render that out, let's go and head over to the render settings with our camera selected. Up here under general, instead of render type a still image, I'm going to go and pick an image series or movie. So you don't really ever want to use movie, because if something goes wrong, especially on high-res animations, and you may have to re-render parts of your animation, you can't really fix a movie, but you can fix an image series. So when you do that, click image series. I'm going to make it maybe slightly less large, so maybe 800 by 800. And we then have to give it a location. So I'll go and pick something on my desktop. I'll call it animation test. I also get into the habit of putting another folder in there, just because there'll be several versions of the animation being rendered out. So in my case, it'll be version 1. That's the folder. And then you can go and give it a name that you'd like each image to be saved as. So in our case, we're going to save frames 80 to 100, and they'll all have a name at the end. So I'm going to call it I don't know, Dyna, maybe. Dyna v1 hyphen. That's my file name. And Daz Studio will append a 4-digit number. So in our case, 0080, 0081, 0082, and so forth until it reaches 100. And that's all there's to it. Then you go and hit render, and it'll render all the frames in the animation. If you do it now, it'll use iRay to do this. And that'll depend on your render settings. This might take some time. If you wanted to just have a preview animation that works much faster and to see what it looks like, you can change this here to viewport. And then anything that is currently set up here in the viewport as a rendering engine will be used. So if that's iRay, it'll be iRay. If it's filament, it'll be filament. If it's texture shaded, it'll be texture shaded, and so forth. So it's going to be a little bit faster. So if I go and do this now and hit render, then Daz Studio is going to go to work, and you can see the timeline is stepping through, rendering each image. No worries. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you being here. Looks like it's already finished, which is neat. So now on my desktop under animation test under V1, I have a lot of these images, and they now are essentially the animation. And I would now go and stitch this together in, there we go, she's blinking and she's happy, she's got transparent background and all that. And this I would now go, and to turn that into an animation, I'd now go and either use Photoshop or a video editor for that, like Premiere. So Photoshop will handle it. And I'm assuming you have Photoshop, right? I'll quickly show you how to do that. Photoshop isn't great at previewing things, but it's marvelous at post-production, as you know, and it'll be, there's always something that you need to change on your images, so let's use Photoshop, stuff that we have already. So let's go to File and Open, and then navigate to our animation. And so if you have an image sequence that is numbered this way, then Photoshop will make this option available here. You just click that, and that means it won't just open the first image in the series, it will open this as a complete image sequence. And that's really handy because you don't have to get involved. It'll ask you what's the frame rate on this, and we say actually Photoshop, it's 30 frames a second. And then it'll actually import all the images that we've rendered. And it now looks like a still image, but it's actually an animation. So it has this timeline at the bottom here. If you double click that, there's another timeline, and it will let you do all kinds of things. So you can go and preview this. So if I go and click play, you can see that she's actually blinking. Righty. It's animation in Photoshop, but you can now also do other things. So this is now the whole video group here, in which this video reside. So if you wanted to go and give this a background here, now that we have transparency, you go and I'll just make just a background color, and that you just drag underneath the video group, and now you have a background that, well, needs to be kind of slotted into here and made slightly less. You can also go and duplicate these things here in Photoshop. I think does Alt work on here? No, that doesn't work. Duplicate that. So now we have two versions of the eye blink. Oops. Might as well make it 3. There, 3. But we only had to render this out once. It's kind of neat. So now you have, you know, her sitting there blinking all the time, which is kind of cool. But we only rendered it out once, which is neat. So we have our background, we have the person sitting there. Now, how do we get this out as in how do we render this out so that we can share it with people? Maybe we need to make that a bit darker here. So that we do by heading over to File, Export, Render Video. It's another little hidden feature that Photoshop has. So seriously cool that it has all these things, and it makes it, you know, it does away with the video editor. You don't have to use it. This dialog is a little confusing. High quality is good as an output, but you have several options here as to what you want. High quality is a good starting preset. This is your document size, so mine was 800 by 800. This is the frame rate that you can override here, and you can even change the output codec. So H.264 is a good starting point. And then let's call it eye blink animation and hit render, and then Photoshop will go and do its thing, and eventually we'll have a playable video on our desktop. There she is. Eye blink animation MP4. There, she's blinking. And if I go and set this to repeat, she goes and blinks. Maybe a little bit too fast, admittedly. But yeah, that's how that works in principle. And we could do a lot of the, you know, background things. I can render this at an iRay now. Play it back at half the speed, I'd say. I think this is actually 60 frames. Did Photoshop accidentally make 60 frames here? I think it might have done. On export. No, it has done 30. Yeah, because to me it looks a bit like it's a bit too fast. But you know, that's how it works. Flirting gone wrong. Yes, exactly. Ding, 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 ding. Exactly. Does it do speed as well? I think it might. Yeah, speed. So we can just go say 50%. Well, also then do that. Technically, every block needs to do that now. So 50% speed. And then elongate. So this is way easier in Premiere to deal with these things. And also it gets twice as long in regards to playback. And export render video. And we'll say eye blink V2. Gone slightly less wrong. See what that is. Yes, Rod, you were very, very brave. I have to say, you're a very brave man for even entertaining like proper video editing in Photoshop. For short animations, I can see it working, but Rod's the master of literally editing 20-minute videos in Photoshop. It's crazy. I have the greatest respect for you, my man. Eye blink V2, now with slightly less scare factor. He says, it's not actually that much less scary. It's still scary. We didn't render enough pause after that. We only rendered this one bit here. You're very welcome, Camilla. No worries. Yes, and now it's about practice. And yes, absolutely. This is, I think one thing Tony Robbins said, knowledge is, what is it? Knowledge is useless without action. Think about that. Yes, you gotta really do it and put it into practice, and that's that's what's gonna install it in your brain.